I'm Brian Van, Sportbike Today I'm going to show you how to replace your OEM wheel spacers, which, as you know, if you have an R3, these things fall out all the time when you're trying to do your tire changes, with the driven captive wheel spacers. Okay, if you own a Yamaha R3 and you've done wheel changes on it, tire changes on it, you already know. Front or back, neither one's a whole bunch of fun, okay? In the front, these wheel spacers, man, these things just love to fall out all the time. In the back, we have two problems. Wheel spacers falling out, and then we have these wonderful chain adjusters literally falling out. On this bike, I've installed the captive wheel spacers, front and rear wheel. I have also done, and we have another video that Steve will have up pretty soon, I have also modified the swing arm and the chain adjuster a little bit. We're talking drilling 8 holes, 4 pieces of safety wire, and about a half an hour to hold these bad boys in there so you don't have a problem anymore. And when you see me put the rear wheel on this bike, I do it on the table, no Pitbull pit crew tire wedge, no foot underneath it to hold it, nothing. So it's the worst possible angle and way to do it. And it just literally jumps right on there. So I'll say that this for sure was effective. What you're replacing is you're replacing these heavier OEM spacers that don't hold themselves in there with machined aluminum, red anodized spacers that have a lip on them that holds them once they're pushed through and they're onto the other side of the seal, okay? I want to show you something else on this R3 right now too. We'll do that again. We have another little project we've been working on. This has already been ridden on one time. Notice the rolling resistance of this is like nothing right now, okay? And the chain, it's not even warm. The chain's not even warm. It hasn't been ridden for a week, right? We did a custom chain kit with a non-O-ring chain, couple of Vortex sprockets, a project I did with Vortex. Look for that as well. If you're racing or track day riding an R3, this would be for you. This wouldn't be a street mod at all, right? Because it's not an O-ring chain, so you have to maintain and lubricate it at a much higher level. But for track bikes, and odds are if you're doing the wheel spacers, you're probably riding the bike on the track, this could be cool. And we've already ridden it once. Max did the race school on it, and it held up great. The chain tension's exactly where it was, and you could see clearly the resistance of it is very, very little. Come on up front. You can see the spacers are in here, and those just really made installing the front wheel a whole bunch easier as well. I came up with another little thing. We're not going to show it here on the video, but I drilled a little hole in the back of the brake pad, the one that's on the non-piston side opposing the piston, a little hole in the back of the brake pad, a little hole on the caliper anchor itself, and just kind of safety wire the brake pad over so it holds the pad against the caliper. Okay, and it's not going to create any issues at all, right? I'm not going to show you all that right now, but you can look at your own. If you're mechanically inclined enough, you can do that. And if you're changing tires of the track, that will help you quite a bit too. You do these things in conjunction with those captive wheel spacers to make your life a whole lot easier. If you want to see the steps it takes to install these spacers, stay tuned. We're going to show you every one of them. Okay, first thing we have to do is pull the front tire off. I've got a 19mm socket and a 17mm wrench. It's important to note too, when you do this stuff, don't throw your axle in the dirt, or even let it roll around on the garage floor and all the grime. I kind of have a nice clean rag to let it sit on. Push your axle through, support the tire, pull it out. The wheel is now resting on the ground. Just going to kind of sit that right there on the rag. Now to get it out, just kind of roll it forward and work it around the fender like so. Now we'll take it over to the tool cart and replace the wheel spacers. Okay, now we've got the wheel over here on the tool cart. I'd like to point out it's pretty clean right now. Not that this kid had anything to do with it, because, well, it seems Dad always ends up cleaning the bike, right? Replacing the tires on the R3, taking the wheel on and off, it can be a little bit of a challenge, right? Knocking the spacers off and you go back on. You see that comes out of there with like no effort, okay? You'll take the captive wheel spacers from Driven, and notice as compared to the stock, see that big lip on the inside? Well, that's what you install inside on the back side of that dust seal. That holds it in there much better and reduces the likelihood that it's going to pop out, okay? You want to make sure that you do have some grease here that's lubricated that seal, and that is really well lubricated right now, enough so that I'm not going to put any more in there. Never pass an opportunity to deep clean your wheel. This one's already pretty good, but just some of the other stuff, I'm going to wipe it off if I see it. It's important when you install this, you want to kind of rock it in like so. You're going to put some downward pressure. And you'll know once you've got it in there, it kind of seats itself, okay? Spin it, rock it around, everything feels good. I want you to check the lip on the seal to make sure you don't have part of the lip pushed down. Now flip the tire over, and we'll hit the other one. These are also a little bit lighter. I mean, I don't know that that's really going to be a big deal or not, but it's an opportunity to lose some weight on the bike. Same deal. Like on an angle, downward pressure. Double check, make sure the seal is not distorted. And we're ready to head back over the bike, install the wheel. Okay, now before we go to put the wheel back on, let's clean off the axle. This one's already relatively clean. We're going to put a light coating of MPPL on it just to lubricate it. Spray it on the rag. And then just kind of wipe the axle. Helps it slide in easier. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and slide the wheel in here under the fender. I've got a 120/70 front on this. It's a little bigger than the stock one. It's a little tighter under the fender. It clears just fine though. Make sure you get the caliper in position. Brake pads on this thing spread apart. Roll the wheel back. Get that rotor to slip between the pads, just like that. And then lift up. Take your axle, we've already lubricated it, and slide it right through. And you can clearly see that having those captive spacers on there really made that easier. Normally when I'd put this thing on, I'd hit one of the spacers, the damn thing falls off, and then you're starting all over again. So that made a difference on this bike. The way Driven designed these, they hold themselves in there pretty well. I think this is definitely a worthwhile mod on the R3. Now you've got your axle nut. You know, here we get to the part where, you know, torque wrench, man. I mean, if that's something you feel more comfortable using than not using, now's the time you want to grab your torque wrench. I'm just going to use my 1/2-inch ratchet here. And we'll get this torqued up. As always, when you service anything in the front wheel, want to finish, make sure you get the brakes all pumped up, double check everything, like so. So there you go, there is the Driven captive spacer install on the front wheel. Okay, now the rear wheel. You can see this one actually kind of holds itself in there, so the design of this is a little bit different than what we're used to. Okay, so pop that one out. Wipe this off a little bit, and that seal is just a little to the dry side. Just want to get a little bit of lubrication in there. The design of this one's different than what we showed you in the front and what we're going to show you on the other side of this rim. Okay, because the stock one actually held itself in there pretty well. I'll show you with this. See how that just dove right in there? That does hold itself in there a little bit better than the stock one, so we are moving a little bit forward, but still pretty similar. So don't freak out when you see that, you know, it's basically the same shape as the stock. Hang that up, we'll turn the tire over. Now this one, that's what you were expecting right there. Just boom, just pops right out. Very little resistance. See, this one has a lip. I'm gonna put a little lubrication inside of there. Fronts look good, this back one's a little bit drier. And then we'll go ahead and push this down in there. Remember to check your seals when you're done and make sure the lips have come up all the way around. Like so. Now we're ready to put the wheel back on the bike. Okay, now it's time to see if the driven captive wheel spacers plus the mod I made to hold the chain adjusters in here. We got a separate video on this. We're going to show you how to do this for free, super easy. Before I go to put the wheel in place, I like to lubricate the rear axle with just a little bit of MPPL. I previously cleaned it. Just a thin coating is really all that you need. I'm going to lay it on the rag. I don't want to get any dirt particles on it. Okay, make sure your caliper hanger is lined up with the slot on the swing arm. Your brake pads, make sure that they're spread apart a bit. Notice I took out my Pit Bull Pit Crew tire wedge. Okay, didn't want to have any advantage at all, so we took that out of the equation. First step is, just like any other wheel, let's roll it up in here. Get the chain to come over onto the sprocket. Okay, it's fair to say this is a lot harder to do on a work table than it is when you're on the ground. I don't have my foot to support it. I took my tire wedge out of here to make this as hard on myself as humanly possible for some reason. Lift up on it. Make sure your caliper is in the groove. The hanger for the caliper is in the groove. Get that started through. Voila. And let me tell you, I've done this before on this work table. It normally sucks really super bad because you're contending with all this stuff falling out, the spacers getting knocked out, right? Then the chain adjusters fall out. So that was a stark improvement. I think it was a combination of both the driven captive wheel spacers and that mod I made. Just gonna snug it up a tiny little bit. Now I have a little trick that I like to use because my chain's already dialed in. Chain tension's right where it should be. Just put an Allen wrench and put a wrench or something in between the sprocket and the chain. I want to pull those chain adjusters all the way against the swing arm before I put any real torque to this. And you can see that I'm able to actually do that without even having a backup wrench on the axle. For final torque, I will of course use a backup wrench. Remember, the R3 uses a locking nut for the axle nut. And you can clearly see that between the wheel spacers, the driven captive spacers, and this little mod that I made here, 4 pieces of safety wire, drilling 8 holes, it is now a lot easier to put the rear wheel back on your R3. I'm Brian Van, sportbiketrackgear.com.